All right, there we go. So I guess I just want to start, just have a couple quick announcements and administrative things. One, if anyone's on here and isn't on our listserv, feel free to send me a message in the chat with your email during the meeting, or just send me an email afterwards and I can add you to that listserv just so you can stay up to date on all our organization meetings and events and things like that. So that's just a basic thing. I did want to just go over just a couple kind of brief updates of things that have been happening with our organization. Since we haven't had too many meetings this semester, but we've been able to do a few things. So actually a couple weeks ago, a few of us tagged along with some of the Iowa, the Hawkeye Caucus Day, where the university brought a whole bunch of people to Des Moines, to the Capitol, to kind of talk with legislators just about the university. So we brought a few members there, and we were able to talk to a few of the legislators, and that overall was just a really good time, and a great sort of introduction to the Capitol, and hopefully we can follow up on that in the future and potentially organize some more one-on-one meetings with some of our legislators. So that was one thing that happened. Another thing that we have going on is a few of us are helping with sort of a statewide initiative for the upcoming elections, the primary being in June, where we're going to be reaching out to all of the state and federal candidates for offices and asking them various science policy related questions. So we're actually in the sort of finalization stages of crafting those questions in the survey. We're reaching out to our partner organizations. If that's something that you are interested in and getting involved, since we, the more help we have once we reach out to all the candidates, just to have more people to make calls and send emails, that helps out. So if you are interested in getting involved with that, again, you can send me an email or send me something in the chat, and I can get you added to that group. I think that's all I have for updates. Just one quick note: we will be preparing for our elections for the executive committee coming up here shortly. So I think I sent out a form last week with a form to submit any nominations if you're interested in running for one of the executive committee positions. So I think that'll end this Friday. So if you are interested in that, definitely look for that email and fill out that form. Then after that, we will do the elections via the Engage platform, which the university sort of runs for the student organizations. And so if you're not already involved with Engage or aren't an actual member on Engage, you can go over and find our organization there and join us. I think that's everything I had for just general announcements. So I will now kind of turn it over to our main event, and that is a discussion about the AAAS Science Technology Policy Fellowship. And we're really excited to have two former alumni, which I believe you're both grad students here, but I'll let you describe your specific, how you're affiliated, with Matt and Angela. And we also have Jessica, who is from AAAS as well, to kind of talk about some of the more logistics in the program itself. So I'll let them all introduce themselves, and we'll start with Jessica to kind of go over a basic overview of the program.
Thank you, Riley. Thank you, everyone who's sharing your morning with us today. I'm really happy to be here, happy to have this conversation. I'm really looking forward to hearing from Angela and Matt as well and listening in. And so I'm hoping that I can, in this first overview, set the table for us about what this fellowship is, share some of the acronyms or some of the logistics, because we might be part of the alphabet soup of Washington, D.C., and then hand it over. So I'm Jessica Soule. I'm the recruitment director for the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships program. So that means I get to meet lovely folks like yourself and, get to work with fellows like Angela and Matt, who are then paying it forward and talking about their experiences. So since we have reasonable sized group on this chat, I also would love for us to play around and use the response, like hand raising or thumbs up. Like, I would love to know how many of you know about AAAS, know what AAAS is, or have a sense of what AAAS is or does. I'm seeing hands, I'm seeing the yellow hands. Great, okay. Riley, okay, yeah. So AAAS, we are the American Association for the Advancement of Science. We are a very large general scientific society. We are the publishers of the journal Science and all of its sibling journals as well. So a lot of people know of AAAS through the journals, or perhaps you're even a member of the society. And AAAS's mission is advancing science and engineering and innovation, throughout the world for the benefit of all people. And that's a big mission. And there's a lot of programs and work happening at AAAS that support that mission. And I think seeing it in the slide, it makes a lot of sense of why AAAS has been leading this policy fellowship for the last 50 years. We're about to hit our 50th milestone. Our 50th class starts in September. And so this science policy fellowship absolutely is a core flagship program of AAAS. And so the goals of the fellowship are really that it's a mutually beneficial experience where expertise comes to Washington, D.C. and spends a year contributing to the scientific enterprise, learning about federal policy, learning how the federal government works, or maybe sometimes doesn't. And then it's meant to also be beneficial for the scientists and engineers who spend that year, whether they decide to stay in policy or pivot into another sector, that they are hopefully transformed and carrying with them different perspective, different relationships to the rest of their career. And so I also wanted to just quickly share the eligibility criteria for applying to the S&T Policy Fellowships program. So right at the top here, it's holding a doctoral level degree. So somebody can apply when they hold their doctoral level degree or a master's in engineering with 3 years of work experience. Holding US citizenship or dual citizenship, and not being a full-time permanent federal employee or a AAAS employee, but of course being a temporary, postdoc in the federal government or a term limited position, that's not usually a problem. So AAAS places about 150 new fellows every year, and they get placed in all 3 branches of the federal government: executive, legislative, which is Congress, and judicial. Now, our fellows today were in the executive branch. I'm going to look to see if Matt and Angela, they're not shaking their heads and telling me I'm wrong. So, okay, they were both executive branch fellows, but we also have typically 2. This year, we actually have 3 placements in the legislative branch and 1 placement in the judicial branch as well. And so somebody who's applying to AAAS can apply to 2 of those 3 categories when they're applying. And applying like that is saying, please consider me for all of the opportunities in that category. And I know that Angela and Matt will be able to answer questions about what it was like to apply, to go through an interview process, a matching process during interview week, and how do you actually get from, checking a box in the application to deciding you're accepting a placement somewhere in Washington, D.C. And this is just a visual of some of the placements where we've had fellows recently. A lot of executive branch agencies. I believe, Angela and Matt, you were at the NIH and Department of Justice. Is that right? Okay. But we also have the National Science Foundation. We have the State Department. We have fellows doing domestic work, but we also have fellows at these agencies doing international work or collaborations with across federal agencies. And so I know that before I joined this fellowship, I didn't have a good understanding of all of the incredible work happening at the federal government, at the federal level, and all of the different needs for types of scientists, social scientists, engineers to bring their expertise and contribute. And I would be remiss if I did not also mention that we have partner science societies. These are other science societies like the AAAS that also fund their own fellowship placements. Now, most of these fellowship placements are in the legislative branch, so congressional fellowships, and most of them offer 1 or 2 placements. And I share these with you because each of them has their own application process, and they have their own eligibility criteria, but somebody could apply to as many of these partner societies as they were eligible and able, and they can also apply through AAAS. And often these partner societies let folks apply while they're completing their degree. So while with AAAS, we talked about you have to hold your degree when you apply, For some of these partners, you might be able to apply in your final year. And so this is a common pathway for folks who are really engaged in policy and want to try to get into a policy fellowship as soon as possible after finishing up their degree. And now something that I think is special about STPF is that it's not just the placement for the year, it's really also meant to be a year of learning and professional development. And so there's professional development all year long that starts with a 2-week orientation. Again, I'm just going to tease that I'm sure Matt and Angela can tell you a bit about their orientation process, but it is a crash course in the federal government. It is a chance to meet your fellow fellows. And then after that orientation, there's monthly workshops that are focused on, yes, on your policy chops and on, your policy writing, communication, these other leadership skills, but also helping fellows think about their career post-fellowship as well. And recently, it may have been after your time, Angela and Matt, but we now have career coaches who are approved by the program. And so fellows can use their funds for career coaching as well as professional events and conferences. And so the program tries to have this holistic support structure where fellows, yes, are doing the fellowship, but they have each other, they have the program, they have a liaison on staff who is their point of contact, who can help be a sounding board if they have questions about their fellowship placement. They're just trying to support fellows holistically through the experience. So if any of this sounds interesting, you're all still here with us. So I do want to just quickly cover, what are we looking for in our fellows? So this is a quick visual of, okay, we try to be really transparent and show how we score our applicants. And it's out of 100 points. So right at the top in the center, 40 of those 100 points are your scientific and technical background. So finishing up your degree, contributing to your field, appropriate for your career stage, that is a huge part of this. But then the other 60 points are split evenly between your leadership and leadership potential, your communication, your outreach, your interpersonal skills, your critical thinking, your problem solving abilities, and the commitment to the fellowship's objectives and opportunities is really about understanding that this is public service, that it's going to require flexibility, that's going to get you outside your comfort zone, and a willingness to embrace that part of the experience as well. And I'll leave it to Matt and Angela to share more about how they approached an application, how that kind of looked for them. But you're not seeing here, right, already being a policy wonk, right? We're looking for a demonstrated interest in policy. So there's a reason why you came to this webinar today, right? You have this interest in policy. So really it's about how do you demonstrate that interest and demonstrate that this is how you want to spend a year or two coming to DC and learning about federal policy and putting, what you're experiencing, maybe at the state level, the local level, at the campus level, bringing it to Washington, DC for the federal level as well. Okay, I am going to really briefly share that our application has 8 steps. I'm only sharing this year because if anyone's planning to apply, when you first start the application, you see 4 steps and it's like, great, 4 steps, I can knock this out, right? I'm putting in my name, I'm putting in my degree, excellent. But what happens when you hit step 4 and you select your program areas and you can pick up to 2, suddenly it unlocks a new step and it's like, oh no, there's more of an application here. And step 5 is where you have to enter references. So you're going to need to provide 3 references, names and emails and their information. And then once you enter their references, now a new step gets unlocked. And this is where you write essays. So it's, why are you coming to do this fellowship? How can you contribute to policy? And I really think that steps 5 and 6 are where you'll spend the most time and energy. And again, Matt and Angela can correct me or tell me about their experiences, but I think it's worth knowing that when you first start it, you can't kind of see all of the steps, and that I think the steps that take the most time come a little bit later. And then 7 and 8, that's the breeze, right? Or maybe 7 is the most stressful part where you review and you look, for days on end for typos or keep changing wording. That's how I edit. And then step 8 is you're agreeing to the ethics statements and hitting submit. And so if you're still with me here, if this all still sounds okay, the application is going to open June 1st, just a couple weeks away, and closes November 1st. We review the applications after November 1st, so we don't review on a rolling basis. But the benefit to starting early is just having more time to write those essays, contact your references, make sure you're happy with all the pieces of your application by November 1st. That November 1st deadline is also that date when you have to hold your degree by or have successfully defended and completed all your revisions. So if you can defend by November 1st, you've completed all your revisions, and you can get a letter from your committee chair or an advisor that says they have completed their degree and they're just waiting for it to be conferred by November 1st, that should also mean you can apply by this cycle. And then the review process goes through the following spring, and then people who are selected for the fellowships would start September 1st of 2023. So with that, I know I just went through a whole lot, and there's a lot more detail, and so I'm gonna stop sharing this and just turn it over to Matt and Angela to really color in the picture I just started to like sketch out for us.
Well, thanks so much, Jessica. That was really helpful. I think there was a lot of information there, but we're recording it. So if anyone needs to go back through, they can always look at the video later and pause it. With that, I think we'll move to Angela, if you are ready.
Yeah, can you remind me again how long I'm supposed to take?
Oh, it doesn't really matter, but somewhere 5-10 minutes, maybe just a brief introduction of how you related to Iowa, kind of your experience, why you applied, that kind of thing.
Okay. So I was chatting with Riley at the beginning. I'm a native Iowan, so I'm from Winterset, which is southwest of Des Moines. I went to a small Iowa private college, Clark University up in Dubuque. And that's where I met my husband. And then I went to grad school at the University of Iowa. So I was in the Department of Anatomy and Cell Biology. So I'm going to fall into the biomedical sciences here. I spent about 5 years at the University of Iowa. One of the policy things I was able to put on my resume for AAAS, as well as at the University of Iowa, I was a part of the Graduate Student Senate, which if you aren't currently involved, that's a great opportunity. It's not that much of a time commitment, and it lets you kind of dip your toe into bureaucracy. So I spent 5.5 years at the University of Iowa. I graduated my PhD, and then and when I was at the University of Iowa, I knew that I didn't want to be a PI at that point. I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do, but I knew I didn't want to be a PI. So at that point, I was thinking, oh, maybe I want to get into industry. And so when I was looking for a postdoc, I was looking for something, not necessarily that I was going to pick an area of science that I was going to spend the rest of my life doing. I was more interested in picking somewhere that I could expand my skill set and develop a resume that would be appealing to industry. And so for my postdoc, I actually chose St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, which one, has a great reputation, two, has a great postdoc program, because up until recently, they didn't have a graduate program associated with them. And so all of the resources and programs and things that you would experience as a graduate student or an undergrad, St. Jude has directed for postdocs. And so they've got career development opportunities and lots of social events that they really try to cater to their postdocs and set them up. So while I was at St. Jude, they had one of the professional development events was, okay, what do you want to do with your life? And so they were talking about all the different things that you could do with your degree now. And so they brought in representatives from industry, they brought in representatives from government, some from communication. So they basically tried to sprinkle in all the different potential career paths besides being a PI. And through those interactions, I realized I don't think I really want to go into industry. I had met a representative from the FDA, and she was talking about scientific review for applications for new drugs. And I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. And so then I started thinking about the government, and then I found I asked a lot of people, what's the best way to get your foot into the door in government? And almost unanimously, they said AAAS fellowship. So then I started looking at the AAAS fellowship, and I've now been in Washington for, I think, 4 years. Yeah, 4 years. 4 years in August. Yeah, maybe 5. Yeah, 4 years. 4 years. So that's a brief introduction. I did my fellowship at the NIH, and once I did a 2-year fellowship, so you sign up for 1 year and then you can renew for a second if you want to stay and your office wants to keep you. So I did a 2-year fellowship, and I'm actually still working in the same office that I did my fellowship with. Once my fellowship was coming to an end, they basically created a position for me, and I've been there ever since. So that is my story. Matt?
Hi, folks. So I am a Midwestern neighbor, but I grew up in Wisconsin, so don't hold that against me. So I did my undergrad at University of Wisconsin, and then ended up coming to Iowa for graduate school in 2010, where I was in the neuroscience graduate program, and did my graduate training there under Dan Trinnell. And as I was sort of doing that process, towards the end, I realized I did not want to be a PI. And I was trying to figure out sort of where I did want to go. And as one of the things I'd connected with, back in my day, we didn't have anything quite like the group you have, which is a really nice opportunity to sort of, get involved in policy and outreach stuff. But I did connect with the graduate school services, career services. I think it's Jen Titel's office there at Iowa. And they had some really good resources in terms of, I don't even know if they're still connected with this, but they had like a versatile PhD service where you got to read career narratives of people in different sort of options. And that was really useful because there was a neuroscientist who was in government, and I got to hear about, I think I first heard the fellowship referenced in that sort of career narrative. And so it sort of was sitting at the back of my mind as I was sort of thinking about options between industry and sort of data science sort of areas or government service. And so I finished up in 2015 and sort of had a brief postdoc, sort of finishing up some graduate work. And then a member of my committee had sort of a 1-year postdoc position to do some data analysis. And so I did that. And as part of that, that's when I applied to the fellowship as sort of an opportunity to just see if I could, explore the sort of interest in government service. And so I sort of put it in and then forgot about it because, as you saw in that timeline, it's sort of a long time between November 1st and then sort of January, February, and you hear back, oh, hey, you made it to this first round. And then I found I made it in this first round and sort of then continued with that process through the interview process and ultimate matching, which it's a process, it's an experience. In the COVID times, I think all this has been virtual, but when you do the interview, I don't know, was last year in person, Jessica? No, maybe not.
It was virtual, and it was
Okay.
even virtual this spring.
Okay, so, well, if it gets back to in person, it's sort of a crazy time because they bring you out to Washington for a week if you're a finalist, and then you run around to all these different agencies to interview in person. And so I was literally running around Washington, DC all week and had about 15 different interviews with potential offices. So it's quite the experience. I did interview for a lot of NIH positions, given sort of a biomedical background in my training, but actually where I ended up matching was the National Institute of Justice, which is a small grant agency within the Department of Justice, and they fund sort of grants for state and local governments and researchers trying to, I guess it's more researchers trying to help support courts, corrections, and law enforcement, and trying to bring evidence and research to that sort of aspect and provide the sort of latest updates. And so the guy running the fellow program at NIJ really wanted neuroscientists affiliated with it. He was sort of actively recruiting them because he wanted to bring sort of some of that cognitive neuroscience, sort of cognitive psychology elements that were sort of missing from some of the stuff they were developing. it was an experience. So this was me going outside my comfort zone as somebody who was working with, neurological patient populations for my research, and then trying to figure out, okay, how do we make this make any sense to, sort of, how do I bring my science to an area or my expertise to an area that really, it required me to think broadly about sort of what I can bring as a scientist. So, not just sort of my scientific background, but also sort of, just understanding how to analyze systems, or how to write solicitations. A lot of it was involved with sort of helping write some solicitations. I also got involved with a strategic planning initiative where they were trying to write a 5-year strategic plan for a program that brings mid-level law enforcement into, and to get them involved with sort of data and research aspects. And so it was sort of like I analogize it to a like MD PhD program for cops, essentially. It was like trying to get them just a little bit involved in more research, evidence-based sort of policy in terms of policing. And so I helped write a 5-year strategic plan for that, even though I had no background in that. But they needed help. And so it was just, I sort of dove in and I thought, this is a really cool program. I sort of know how biomedical training works, so maybe we can try and incorporate some concepts there. So that was sort of my fellowship experience somewhere else. And at the end of it, NIJ was pretty clear. Unfortunately, they were clear with me, like, we can't really hire you because they just didn't have a good category or fit or budget for hiring sort of folks from the biomedical sciences. There's a lot of sort of weird federal job category stuff I won't get into, but essentially that was the issue. And so I was going to plan to do a second year, but I had applied to an open NIH hiring position for a health specialist, which is sort of a support role for program officers that the NIH has. And I ended up getting an offer to work at the National Institute on Aging in their sort of cognitive neuroscience of aging branch. And so I took that position, and then I've been there for about 2 years, and now I've been promoted to program director in that same office. So I sort of had the experience of going from my fellowship to a different federal office for my career transition. I think I'll stop there and we'll open up for questions.
Yeah, thanks, Angela and Matt. That was really interesting. So I guess, yeah, we can open it up to questions now. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question, or if you want to post it in the chat, I'll monitor that as well and can ask it from there. I definitely have some questions, but I'll open it up to the group first to see if anyone's got anything right off the bat.
I have a question. So first of all, thank you for speaking with us today. I really appreciate hearing y'all's specific journeys of how you guys got into the program, especially because y'all are in different disciplines. I was just curious, I guess, for both of y'all, because this is a competitive fellowship and this is a pretty big one. So I was curious from y'all's personal perspectives, what do you think was the most beneficial or highlight reel of your own college careers that made you a standout applicant for AAAS? What do you think was one of the juicy, hey, this is what I demonstrated and was very instrumental in you getting this? I guess for both, or Jessica, if you see some really good ones, that too.
I'll go first. I think the demonstrating an actual policy interest, I think, is important for the application. And so, like I said, I had some experience from graduate school being on the Graduate Student Senate. And then I also had some experience from my postdoc, in which I was part of a group similar to this that had an interest in science policy. So it wasn't a big official organization or anything. It was just an interest group of St. Jude postdocs, which I was also then able to put onto my application. So those were the two formal things I had that demonstrated policy, but then I've always had a longstanding interest in helping society and how government works. But I think it's really important to not only be able to talk about your science, but also demonstrate flexibility and a general interest in public service and an interest in expanding your skill set. I think that's key. Max, do you have a?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'd reinforce that flexibility of sort of thinking aspect of things. So I had a bit less in terms of probably formal policy sort of exposure. I did have more outreach and communication stuff. So that stuff you can also highlight as part of the application as well. So I was involved, the neuroscience graduate program in Iowa does like a brain bee every year. And so doing that, I was involved with sort of the committee that ran that, and it involved doing lab tours and going to high schools and talking about, neuroscience stuff to kids. So sort of that public facing interaction aspect can be helpful as well. I also briefly joined the postdoc association at Iowa for like the year or so I was a postdoc, and got involved a little bit with sort of the outreach I think they had a policy committee, but it was mainly focused on like developing a survey of postdocs. That's what I did for a little bit. But I think, just thinking about broadly how you can apply your tools as a scientist to sort of public service, and maybe particular policy questions that you are interested in as a scientist, whether that's the fellowship likes to talk about science for policy and then the policy of science, so it can be sort of either way. So whether or not it's like you bringing the policy questions that your scientific discipline may be relevant to, or more broadly, is that science? Now I got it confused. I'm not sure which is what. One is sort of the things that are specific to your scientific discipline, but some like say maybe funding policy or something like that. Grant funding policy. But the other thing might be sort of policy in terms of say environmental regulations or something where your scientific discipline might be relevant to sort of developing and being an important stakeholder at that table. So I mean, those are sorts of things. Thinking broadly about it and maybe how you could see yourself fitting into that space is something to think about.
I'll add one more point because Matt made me think of it as he was talking. It's also really important with that idea of science policy for science or science policy is that you don't come in with saying I want to do this and this is the only thing I'm interested in doing. It's more keeping things broad and saying I'm interested in policy for science or science policy, and this is how I could use the skills I've developed as a scientist and apply them broadly to all of these different issues. So I'm a cell molecular biologist. I do not do anything related to cell molecular biology now. But what I do is translate science to lay audiences, and I analyze data, and I bring the scientific mind to something. So I'm the only PhD in my office, so I have a much easier time translating these things than they do.
I actually have a second question that's very similar to what Angela just said. Unless someone else has it, I don't want to monopolize with all my questions. Okay, I'm just gonna go then. So Angela, you brought up the next question I had. So something, or the reason why I am interested in this is because I am interested in the science communication. So like what you were saying of I don't really want to do academia and industry isn't necessarily my vibe, but I like science and I like communicating it. I was like, yes, that's me. And so I was going to ask how often in your job on your day to day, how much of a role that plays, that science communication, how integral to your day to day is that, I guess, that skill set.
Well, first I'd say that there's lots of different placements for a AAAS fellows. Some are more communication heavy, some are more policy heavy, some are more actual science program management heavy. I had a friend that did more of the science communication area, and so her entire day was all about science communication. I'm more on the policy side, and I went to a small institute at the NIH, which means I get to do a lot of different things. So my day-to-day is not really consistent. So during the budget cycle, when we're actually writing the justifications for the president's budget, then I'm doing a lot of science communication because I'm drafting a document that's going to go into the president's budget, that's going to go to Congress and be read by people that don't really understand science. And so for that 3 months, 4 months of my life, I'm doing a lot of science communication. For the rest of the year, I will dabble in science communications. There might be, some responses to Congress that we need, or some talking points for our director, or just little things like that I would be doing science communication. But my big science communication is the budget. The rest of the year is filled with the data analysis and trying. So I analyze the data, and then I give talking points to the director and whoever it's going to, this is what it means. But yeah, I do a lot of different things. Matt, do you have anything different?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say in my job sort of day to day as a program director, it's less science communication and more sort of interacting with grantees and potential applicants. I do get to do some of it at sort of outreach events like this, where I get to talk about things. We also do some tracking sort of throughout the year as sort of major publications come out, or, we do a sort of annual sort of culling of scientific advances, so sort of significant findings from our portfolios over the course of the year. And that requires sort of translation into lay audience sort of documents. At sort of a larger institute, I will say we have sort of separate sort of a comms team, if you will, sort of our public outreach team at NIA, who handles a lot of sort of the scientific writing and sort of press releases aspect of things. There's also sort of the more legislative affairs sort of office side of the house, who deals more with sort of prepping briefings and interacting, with congressional inquiries, which is sort of a different type of, sort of communication. The other thing I'll mention, and Jessica, you can correct me on this, but AAAS also has a mass media fellowship. Is that right? Yeah. So there is that opportunity as well. If you're really, really interested in sort of the more popular, popular lay audience communication and science communication as well, that is something to check out, because that is a sort of different experience.
We have a question here in the chat. Do you find the translation of science to be most, from Ryan, I should say, do you find the translation of science to be most engaging, or do you prefer working on how science is perceived and trusted by people, or both?
So I don't know if I get to do a lot of working on how it's perceived by folks in my position. I will say the translation is, I'll sort of answer it differently, and I'm not sure this quite gets at your question, but what I do enjoy about sort of my current role and some of the experiences you get in sort of, at least in funding agency level positions, which there are a fair number of placements there, although that's not obviously, as Jessica pointed out, there's a lot of different offices and a lot of different ways you get to do the fellowship. You get to see the 30,000-foot view of things. So you're not just focused on necessarily what you were doing for your dissertation or even sort of the field. You get to see sort of the breadth of science across an area, across a pretty wide range of things. And so that is kind of refreshing to see sort of just the scope of work being done, trying to identify maybe where there are gaps or opportunities or things that are missing. That is an interesting sort of aspect of the work that you get to do that you don't typically get to do sort of on an individual investigator level, I would say.
So I enjoy the challenge of taking something very scientific and making it so anyone can understand it. I enjoy that challenge. I also really enjoy the trying to convince somebody that this is important. So that's a whole another aspect, and it takes a different kind of skill is trying to convince Congress that yes, what we're doing is important and you should give us more money. So that's always a fun challenge. Because we're within the federal government, we don't really advocate for, trusting in science or that aspect. So really what we do is more the first part of your question of translating it to get something to happen, and not so much the trust in science aspect. I'm not sure if there's a role within the federal government for that one. There's definitely a role within advocacy groups, but having the AAAS fellowship on your resume makes you more appealing to the advocacy groups too. So,
yeah, I mean, I'll just add to that, in terms of sort of outcomes from the fellowship, I will say, both of us are in federal service, but, I believe the official stats, and I don't know if that's still the case, or at least it was when I was a fellow, sort of the official stats is about a third of fellows end up going back to academia in some way, a third go into, say, government service, and then a third go into sort of nonprofit industry world. And so there is, one of the nice things about being in DC is there's just so many sort of mix of, both companies, government, non-government organizations. And so there's a lot of opportunities to network and interact with folks. And if you are interested in that sort of advocacy side of things, there's a ton of, nonprofits or foundations that advocate for different things, and that where in the science domain where they may need good people who can then, help do that sort of advocacy work as well. So there are opportunities for that.
I had a question. First of all, again, thank you for coming and taking the time to speak with us. I know that the baseline requirement is have your PhD, but it just seems like based on the timeline of the application process, it's really likely that you're going to have a job in between, just because it takes about a year from getting your degree. If you're someone who decides this fellowship is something I really, really want to do, I know it's competitive, would you more advocate for taking a few years, get some more experience, post that, whatever, or would you say, just find a job to tide you over until you can apply as soon as possible? Or does it really depend on your situation?
that's a hard question because it is a lengthy interview application process, and it is highly competitive. So it's not like you can bank on it. I was in my postdoc, so I didn't have something that had an end date to it. I didn't apply to the fellowship until my first paper was kind of wrapping up, because I had decided actually my first year of my postdoc that I wanted to do the AAAS fellowship, but I had just committed to a postdoc, so I wasn't going to just walk away. So it gets to what you're talking about there. So I basically stayed in my postdoc until I felt like it was a reasonable completion of it. But had I not gotten the fellowship, I could have continued in the postdoc or started looking. I had something that was stable and something that technically had an end date without having an end date. I would say of the fellows that I've interacted with, I would say probably 50 to 70% of them were in their postdoc or some other fellowship or something before they came to the AAAS, but there's still a lot of people that were straight out of grad school. How they managed that, I'm not sure, but yeah. So I guess my suggestion is to do a short-term postdoc, but Matt might have something else to say.
Yeah,
Or-
no, I mean, I was in a similar situation. I think mine was a little more definite in that like I said, I sort of got a 1-year postdoc sort of position from somebody who was on my thesis committee. He was like, I have a year of money, to do this data analysis. If you're still figuring stuff out, I'm happy to pay for you to, sort of analyze this data for me while you're sort of doing that. And so that was helpful for me. And so the AAAS fellowship was just one thing out of several things I was just sort of pursuing. I was also doing informational interviews with folks I know who had transitioned to industry during that year. I did some, so I was also planning for that sort of option as well. I'm trying to think, other things you can, if you're really set on sort of, the fellowship is somewhere you want to go, the other thing you can do sort of while you're trying to figure that out is, if there are sort of partner societies that make sense for legislative fellowships, you could go through that as sort of a parallel application. The other thing is, I don't remember, there's the Presidential Management Fellowship, which is its own governmental run fellowship program that I believe has a STEM track. That would be something else you could look into. Not we're here for AAAS, so AAAS program's great, and I hardly endorse it. But if you're thinking about other options and pathways, that is another one. The other thing is in graduate school, and I don't know how many folks are still in school. There are some opportunities that do bring you out to DC on a shorter term. The National Academy has a Merzion Fellowship, if you haven't heard of it, that brings you out to DC for, I think it's 3 months. It's a pretty short thing, but it gives you some exposures to the national academies, which is really great because they do a whole bunch of big government reports for different agencies. And so you get to interact with lots of different sort of groups that government agencies that do sort of science business. And so that's also another way to sort of think about getting exposure to these things.
And I'll just chime in to say, yeah, plus oneing everything Matt and Angela shared, right? Like this fellowship, right? I'm the recruitment director for the fellowship. If you're here and you're interested, I hope that one day we see an application from you. And all that being said, it's your career path, right? So how does this fit into your larger career path? If you can go and get your dream job or a dream postdoc or whatever that is, that's fantastic. And then I think one thing that's nice about this fellowship is that there's no kind of career stage limit. There's no cap where somebody ages out of this. So we have fellows who do this 10 years in, 20 years in, 30 years in, retired, and then deciding they want to be a fellow then. And so really, hopefully this can be something that plugs in where it makes the most sense for you.
Thank you.
Can I ask kind of a silly question? So I know, because this is a big chunky fellowship, and I know you have a lot of applicants like us who are coming, or who I'm assuming are interested in applying straight from grad school, but then you also have some really amazing applicants who are just industry leaders or professors who have just been killing it for the last 20 something years. And that's really intimidating to think of going up against when you're I am a student and you literally changed science and benefited society for the last 20 years. And I think we're graded, or our rubrics might be slightly different, I think is what I might have read previously. But I guess my question is what is the demographic of the fellows y'all take? Is it more younger people like us, or do you guys tend to have the more I hate to say older, but more established individuals? What's that kind of demographic looking like for AAAS fellows?
Yeah, I forget who said it, Matt or Angela, but you were spot on in that, I would say the majority of our fellows are, for us, early career. And so that for us is the first year to 7 years post PhD, which maybe 7 years out, you no longer consider yourself early career. I know they're kind of artificial boxes, but I would say, 2/3 or more of our fellows are probably in that early career space. So you certainly wouldn't be alone in applying. As Matt and Angela were mentioning, and about 1/3 end up being mid or senior career. So the folks who might be taking a sabbatical or doing something else later on. And the one thought is, I encourage everyone not to compete with the other kind of invisible applicants who might be coming, because the questions that we ask our applicants, the why this fellowship, why at this point in your career, those questions are challenging for different reasons for everybody. And so I think somebody who is well established, who is seasoned in their career, they're going to have a difficult time answering that in a different way, but just from a different, the difficulty is unique from somebody who might be earlier career, right? For them, maybe there's more scrutiny about, well, why do you need to come and do this fellowship if you've had all these opportunities in your career? And so just be authentic to yourself. Try not to worry about who else might be applying. But any other wisdom matter, Angela?
I mean, I think, that's accurate. I think the only thing I'll add is, no, I can't remember what I was going to add. I think, that just to think about in terms of, not getting too caught up, because I do remember, like, when I got here for the fellowship, there was people with way more experience in terms of having done a whole bunch of these other, outreach activities or things that, maybe their state had a state level policy thing or something like that. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's, it's not sort of a quantity sort of situation. It's sort of, are you taking, have you taken steps to sort of move beyond your sort of box as sort of a researcher and trying to think about sort of how you can apply yourself to these sort of broader questions, maybe that are facing society. And, sort of that, again, I'll just come back to this sort of idea, this sort of flexibility of thinking about what is it that you have to offer as a scientist to, to the policy world and to sort of government service and things like that. And that's sort of really what we're looking for, or what my understanding is what, the program is looking for in terms of that flexibility, understanding what skills you have to offer and understanding the sort of ways in which you might be able to offer those services and the problems, you might be able to help tackle.
Yeah, I'll add to what Jessica and Matt were saying is that, I mean, at the end of the day, it is a fellowship and it's meant to be helping advance science and basically take scientists and turn them into policy people. So, I mean, it has a defined goal, which is, it's kind of tailored to early stage investigators because part of the application process, you have to justify why, as Jessica was saying, why you want to do this fellowship at this stage and how you perceive the fellowship helping you in your career. And so, I mean, that I would think that would be a little bit harder to spin with an established PI that has all, this great career, to your point, Emily, has done all this great thing for science. It's like, well, you've established yourself and as in academia, why do you need to come do this now? How is this going to help improve you? Where me coming out as a postdoc, it was easy for me to justify how this was going to impact my career because I was still developing my career. So I think it cuts both ways.
So I have a quick question. I'd be curious what it was like, I guess, living in DC for a year or two as part of this fellowship. Like, what was the lifestyle like? Was it a lot of work? How did the, I guess, like salary compare to maybe friends you had that went on to different types of jobs or postdocs?
Yeah, so I mean, it's an adjustment coming from Iowa City to DC. I will give you that. I think I was paying, $760 for a 2-bedroom over on West Winds, and then went to paying, $21.50 in rent. So for a 1-bedroom. So that's an adjustment, but the salary is livable. I mean, it is, I think they try and shoot for, it's on the website somewhere. I think they try and shoot for the equivalent of a GS-12 step 1-ish. If I'm recalling this right. And so it's, it's a pretty livable wage as a postdoc. Yeah, around 83,000, which is, it's expensive area, but you can do pretty okay with that level of salary. And then there's, benefits. So it's, what's the nice part is it's a paid year to maybe 2 years if you're in executive branch to, explore DC, get a chance to, see if this is sort of something you want to do and really get to see sort of all the different ways your scientific training can be applied in this different sphere. DC is great in terms of like, as a city, there are parts of it that aren't so great in terms of it gets really hot in the summer. I'm not gonna lie, like that part's not so great, but we do have a pretty functioning public transit system, and there's a lot of museums. There's always a lot of events going on. The profession, depending on your fellowship placement and there is a bunch of career development sort of activities that Jessica mentioned, whether that's how to network, how to communicate better, leadership training stuff. And then there's also sort of just this infrastructure of all these other events that are going on in DC because you're in DC. So maybe there's a briefing on, something related to, say, neuroscience and ethics or something on the Hill. I went to something like that. There's, they have these Golden Goose Awards every year for its like scientific ideas that seemed innocuous but really panned out to have a better thing. And you get invited, typically they invite the fellows, and you can go to that gala and go meet people there. So there's just a lot of opportunities living in DC that I think is really great.
Yeah, I agree. DC is a fun place to be. Your fellowship year is also fun because they're not only focus on like the professional development and all of that, but they're also very focused on you becoming a coordinated group. So they do a lot to foster collaborations, friendships amongst your set of fellows. We, as the fellows, we often refer to it as a cult because once you're a fellow, you have this now access to this entire network. And in DC, you're constantly running into a former fellow or a current fellow or something like that. And so you have an instant connection. And then once people have done their fellowship, they then go and do all sorts of different things. So you now have connections in all sorts of different companies and agencies and things like that. So that's great. The other great aspect of the fellowship is I feel like they select for a very certain type of person. And so I've yet to meet a fellow that I don't get along with because we have similar interests, we have similar personalities. So then you come to this brand new city, you are definitely out of your depth because DC is its own beast, but part of the fellowship training is teaching you how to function within that beast. So that 2 week orientation does a great job of a crash course getting you ready for this. But you also then have a built-in friend base, so that's also great. So I'm not sure if we answered your question, but I see we're almost out of time. So.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I'll ask just to make sure no one has any real last minute questions, since I think we're running up right on the half hour. But if not, would you all be fine if we just share your email and people reach out if they have follow-up questions? Would that be all right?
Absolutely.
Sure.
All right, perfect. We'll stop the recording.